Ohio State wound up with a pretty difficult schedule in 2024. Let's look at 2025 and see how this schedule shakes out, how tough it is, how it compares to the other teams in the Big Ten. We're going to break it all down for you. So let's start with just the overall schedule here. We'll go back through that in just a second. But first, we're going to look at some of the details of the schedule. First, the non-conference. Ohio State will play Texas, they will play Grambling State, and they'll play Ohio. So obviously Grambling State, Ohio, not too tough of challenges there. But Texas is really going to step things up with the or make this non-conference schedule tougher than the one they had last season. Had a very favorable non-conference schedule last season. This year, huge game against Texas. We're talking about potentially two preseason top 5 team. I would say both teams will be preseason top 5, maybe even top 3. So yeah, that's going to be a huge game to start off the season, coming off of that game they just played in the college football playoffs. So can't wait for that matchup. And again, we do get that big non-conference matchup this season. So let's look at the home and the away. So you've got those 3 non-conference games all at home for Ohio State. Then they got Minnesota, Penn State, UCLA, and Rutgers. So you like Minnesota, UCLA, Rutgers at home. You feel really good about those games. Penn State, going to be a tougher game. So, yes, you do want to play that game at home. That works out pretty well. You look at the road schedule. They've got at Washington. That could be tricky going out west. You've got Illinois, who should be pretty good this season. Wisconsin, we'll see if they're improved. Purdue, and then at Michigan, of course, in that final game of the season. So 5 road games in the conference, 4 games at home. And that's a pretty tough road schedule, really. Again, Michigan and Illinois will be tough games. Washington because of the travel, and then Wisconsin's kind of the wild card. I feel like this Wisconsin team has potential to be a lot better next year, but they also could be pretty bad again. It's hard to say with Wisconsin. I don't think Purdue will be too much of a challenge. So then we look at the changes with the Big Ten schedule. So they're going to lose Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Northwestern, Oregon. Those teams were teams they played last season. And they're going to add Illinois, Minnesota, Rutgers, UCLA, and Washington. I think this is a pretty good trade. Illinois, Minnesota, probably going to be pretty good. But you don't have to play Indiana. You don't have to play Oregon. Obviously, that's going to be a huge advantage. Iowa's always a pretty tough team. And then Nebraska's a team that I think could be pretty good this year. So I think the conference schedule works out pretty well for Ohio State this season. We look at how it compares to other teams in the Big Ten, and there you see these are the records from last year, the conference records for the combined opponents. So Ohio State's combined Big Ten opponents were 38-43 last season, a winning percentage of 47%. That's kind of in the middle. It's not as tough as, say, Wisconsin's, which is really, really tough, but it's also not as easy as Michigan. Look at Michigan's combined conference opponent records from 2024. And again, we're talking about their conference opponents this year, the 2025 opponents, their records from last season. That is a very favorable schedule. So again, Ohio State kind of in the middle, on the lower end, but I'd say that they're pretty much right there in the middle. So yeah, not too tough of a non-conference schedule this year, but it's also, I would say, not easy. And you do have some challenges in there. So they'll start with Texas on August 30th at home, huge game, of course. And then they get Grambling State, Ohio back-to-back. So the non-conference games are right there to start off the season. Then they're going to get their first bye on September 20th, which is pretty early in the year. But I think it's actually in a good spot for them because it's before having to go out west to Washington. So it's before that road game at Washington. They'll play on September 27th. So I think that does kind of work out pretty well for Ohio State. The next game will be against Minnesota at home. Then they'll play on the road at Illinois. And in fact, they're going to have back-to-back road games. Illinois on the road and then Wisconsin on the road, October 11th, October 18th. Then they get their second bye week. So their bye weeks are a little bit early because you got 5 games in a row after that second bye week. You got 3 games in a row, then a bye week. 4 games in a row, then a bye week, and then 5 games in a row. But that's definitely going to be a tough stretch. I mean, you look at the opponents and you think, it's not going to be too tough. But 3 of them on the road, and you got to go at Washington, then Minnesota, who's going to be pretty good. At Illinois, could be one of the top 5 teams in the Big Ten this year. And then Wisconsin on the road. So tough places to play 3 out of 4 games on the road. That's going to be a difficult stretch just in terms of the travel and all that. Then you get that bye week before the final 5 games, and you look at the opponents in the final 5 games. You've got Penn State and Michigan, obviously, going to be probably the 2 toughest games in the Big Ten. But you've also only got 2 road games. So in these final 5 games, only 2 road games. They'll play Penn State on November 1st. Then they'll go on the road to play Purdue on November 8th. UCLA at home on November 15th. Then back home for Rutgers on November 22nd. They'll close things out, of course, with Michigan on the road. So, yeah, I'm looking at that stretch from Washington to Wisconsin as a tough stretch. That's a stretch where, Ohio State going 4-0 in that stretch will be a challenge. It really will. Again, you get Penn State at home after a bye week. Really like that. I love having Texas at home, of course. And then that Michigan game is not after a big game. It's after UCLA and Rutgers at home, but they will have to go on the road for that one. So, I would say, I don't know if I would say this schedule is tougher than last year's. I would say that the conference schedule is definitely easier. It's still tricky. But the overall schedule, when you add in Texas, it might actually be a tougher schedule for Ohio State in 2025.